Serious. If you could learn the truth of any one mystery, urban legend or conspiracy theory, what would you choose? Part 2. Kurt Cobain's suicide. There's several details that have always stood out to me. The shotgun shell's placement. The fact him and Courtney Love were in the middle of a divorce. How excited people say he was about focusing on him and his daughter's relationship. So many different little facts to me. I'd love to be there in the days and weeks leading up to his death. I want to know if he was alone that day. Since 2009, 10 young men in their 20s have drowned in the Charles River in Boston. Usually drunk on weekends, from my understanding. Some people think it is coincidence. Some people think it is a serial killer group called the Smiley Face Killers because graffiti of smiley faces have been found near multiple of these drowning sites. Young men in Boston, be careful. Buddy system. No matter how big and bad you are. When this pandemic is over and bars and back to full capacity, I'd assume they will strike again. I won't be surprised if they have a female working with them to lure these men away. Or maybe it is a man luring them and all of these men were secretly gay. Maybe it's drugs. Maybe it's a cigarette. Maybe the victims were just trying to help someone that is acting desperate. I don't know. But whatever they do to seclude the men, it works. The deceased is usually a good-looking, well-liked college-aged male. They are almost always out with friends until they leave suddenly. They are then found floating down a river or body of water weeks to months later. This one might border on being a conspiracy, but given that we know for a fact that the rich have used their positions to work around the law and that there is a ring of powerful pedophiles, I don't think this one is too far out of the realm of possibility. For the past several decades, there's been a large-scale femicide taking place throughout most of Mexico. The area that has received the most attention has been Ciudad Juarez. A lot of reporters have looked into the deaths, linking them to cartels, corrupt police, possible serial killers. A theory proposed by the FBI based on evidence and bus drivers that transport workers to the local maquiladoras. A very shaky theory proposed by the local law enforcement based on the need for a scapegoat. However, when some agents were surveilling some powers that be regarding suspicious activity when transporting undisclosed items across the border, they overheard conversations linking these powerful people to the disappearances in Juarez. They submitted their reports, but nothing was done, and when they pushed for news, they were fired. They wound up giving what they knew to reporters, who have refused to drop names out of fear of retaliation. Those agents have since disappeared. Considering that the main reporter who leaked the news about the Panama Papers died under suspicious circumstances, I don't think it's too far out of the realm of possibility that these people killed these agents to prevent any news from coming out. The Silent Twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born in '63. They were inseparable and traumatized by bullying for being the only black people in their school. In Wales, they were already hard to understand because they spoke a sped-up Bajan Creole, but they became unintelligible to everyone when they started their twin speak. They would also move in a synchronized way. They often mirrored each other. They eventually talked to no one else except their younger sister Rose. Kept going to school, but refused to read or write. They were put in separate boarding schools to break their isolation, but they would become catatonic. Fast forward, they become riders and experiment with drugs and alcohol. Jennifer started committing small crimes, which led to them being put in a high-security mental hospital. Given heavy antipsychotics, Jen developed tardive dyskinesia. Okay, one of the weirdest parts is that they had a long-standing agreement that if one of them died, the other must begin to speak and have a normal life. While in the hospital though, they believed it was necessary for one of them to die. Jennifer agreed it should be her. They were transferred from that place to a more open clinic. Soon after arrival, Jen was taken to a hospital where she died of acute myocarditis. Sudden inflammation of heart. No sign of drugs or poison. June. I'm free at last, liberated, and at last Jennifer has given up her life for me. To me it was almost as if it was one person in two bodies. June is 57 now. Did George Mallory and Andrew Irvine summit Everest in 1924? And what circumstances lead to their deaths? A member of their expedition sighted what he thought was them roughly 240 meters from the summit, and they appeared to be making progress. The bottle of oxygen and an ice axe belonging to the pair were found in 1991 and 1933, respectively 286 meters from the summit, so it's certain they made it at least that far. Mallory's body was found in 1999 300 meters below the ice axe, with a puncture in the skull and rope injuries indicating a fall. A camera the pair carried that could still have developable film and a picture of his wife Mallory intended to leave on the summit were not found. Definitely the Atlov mystery. The Atlov incident was an event in which 9 Russian hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains in uncertain circumstances. The experienced trekking group. All experienced people had established a camp. During the night, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite, while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, it was uncertain why some of them died. Some bodies showed obvious signs of hypothermia, but others were a mystery. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in the skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these had soft tissue damage of the head and face. 2 of the bodies were missing their eyes, 1 was missing its tongue, and 1 was missing its eyebrows. It's still not really known what happened, though there are loads of theories, including supernatural beings, Russian weapons of mass destruction, chemical leaks, rabid animals and many, many more. The Eliza Lamb case. It's been a while since I've thought of this, but here are the basics of her death from what I remember. Eliza Lamb goes down to California for a vacation. She was a Canadian student. She had mental health issues and wasn't taking her medication. Suddenly, her friends stop hearing from her and no one knows where she's at. I believe around a week later, guests at the hotel complain of water pressure issues and brownish black water. Shortly after, staff decide to investigate the water tank. There, they find Eliza with no clothes, floating in the tank. Obviously this is disturbing, but here's where it gets even more eerie. The water tanks were supposed to be locked. They were on the roof of the hotel, only accessible by staff or by a ladder on the side of the hotel. Also, there's a video of Eliza with a broken timestamp. Mange believed the video is altered for the reason of the timestamp being messed up. She's in an elevator, moving weirdly, looking scared, checking inside and outside. It almost looks like she's interacting with someone or something, but nothing appears to be there. I think the report that came out was that she was really unstable and decided to drown herself in the tank. But that doesn't seem to make sense to me. How would a person who is having difficulty using the elevator alone do the following? Scale the side of the building on a ladder, climb the 14 feet tanks, take all her clothes off, unlock the tank, get in the tank, close it on herself. It seems so incredibly unlikely when you factor in the possibility of the footage being doctored. This case is so strange to me. Green Children of Wilpit. The legend of the Green Children of Wilpit concerns 2 children of unusual skin color who reportedly appeared in the village of Wilpit in Suffolk, England, sometime in the 12th century, perhaps during the reign of King Stephen. The children, brother and sister, were of generally normal appearance, except for the green color of their skin. They spoke in an unknown language and would only eat raw broad beans. Eventually they learned to eat other food and lost their green color, but the boy was sickly and died soon after he and his sister were baptized. The girl adjusted to her new life, but she was considered to be rather loose and wanton in her conduct. After she learned to speak English, the girl explained that she and her brother had come from St. Martin's Land, a subterranean world inhabited by green people. After learning to speak English, the children, Ralph says just the surviving girl, explained that they came from a land where the sun never shone and the light was like twilight. William says the children called their home St. Martin's Land. Ralph adds that everything there was green. According to William, the children were unable to account for their arrival in Wilpit. They had been herding their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise. According to William, the bells of Bury St. Edmunds, and suddenly found themselves by the wolf pit where they were found. Ralph says that they had become lost when they followed the cattle into a cave and, after being guided by the sound of bells, eventually emerged into our land. Was this actually real or just a legend? And if it was real, then is the girl's story about being from the underground true? Where was she really from? The 1966 disappearance of the 3 Beaumont children from a beach near Adelaide. It's an abduction that has haunted Australians. Perhaps it is game theory or behavioral psychology that suggests the dynamics that may have facilitated the abduction. Presumably there was a single male perpetrator who was able to lure and secure 1 or more of the children, and then the others, feeling bound by their natural commitment to look after each other, were drawn in. Once in a vehicle or house, they could not be seen by potential witnesses and could not escape. I find this heartbreaking to imagine, and I don't want the children's fate and the identity of the perpetrator to remain successfully hidden. More recently, the 2011 abduction of 3-year-old William Terrell from the mid-north coast of NSW remains a thorn in the hearts of many. The seemingly purely opportunistic abduction, with its lack of evidence, is astounding in the present era of cell phone tower logs, video cameras everywhere, etc. Really, any and all missing child cases ache to be solved, and I would leap at any opportunity to see the families given back their child, or simply to have closure. What exactly happened to the Orang Medan? An Indonesian cargo ship went missing during World War II and was found in the late 1940s hundreds of miles offshore by a pair of American vessels passing through the Straits of Malacca. They picked up an SOS in Morse code which essentially stated, "I think everyone is dead." Curious, they went looking for and eventually found the ship, some 400 miles offshore, which appeared undamaged. But upon boarding it, they found the corpses of the entire crew all over the place. None of the bodies appeared to have any physical injuries, but they all wore an expression that made it seem as though they had quite literally been scared to death. The American vessels attempted to tow the boat back to port, but a fire broke out in one of the cargo bays while they were hooking up the ropes, forcing them to cut their lines and separate from the ship. Shortly after, there was an explosion aboard the Orang Medan and it sank. Exactly what happened aboard that boat has never been solved. It's one of the first ever documented ghost ships and has become something of a legend since then. There's tons of theories as to what might have happened, but since the ship is gone, we'll likely never know. What happened to David Gibson Smith? David was the son of my church's pastor. He had recovered from drug-alcohol addiction and went to see a friend he met in rehab in Maryland. Supposedly, the friend dropped him off at another friend's place. David had disappeared the next day, leaving his car and phone. The second friend claims to have dropped him off at an uncle's vacant plot of land where he was going to camp. No tent or anything. His remains were found a year later in the woods of a park that is 85 miles away from that location. I think it's very clear that the women were involved in his death in some way, but as far as I know have not been charged. There are other things which implicate the women as well, but I'll leave that for you to research. I just want closure for his family, especially if anyone took actions that endangered him or kept his death secret from the family for 8 months. First of all, I want to know about every missing person, every conspiracy ever. As a kid, I was hooked on conspiracy theories and unsolved murders, and I would get so mad that there is no ending. I was, and still am, convinced every secret ever hidden will all be revealed either when it should be or at the time of your death. As in, should you die, all the universe's secrets and complexities shall be revealed to you. Second, when I read all of the conspiracy theories and missing persons, unsolved murders, etc., I get this weird feeling that I cannot describe, like I should know what happened as if I was the victim or if I did it, especially stuff from the 60s to 80s. It's the weirdest feeling I've ever had, and my brain turns to mush when I read a lot of this stuff or try to explain it. There's some Australian siblings who went missing after a day at the beach. I'm hazy on the details, it was in the 70s or so. They caught a tram to the beach and never returned. Onlookers saw them buy ice cream and talk to a man, and then they were gone. It sounds like an abduction, but their bodies were never found. I was obsessed with the case as a kid. Then you get cases like random bodies turning up inside suitcases in bushland, and if they manage to identify the body, it's someone who went missing years and years and years ago, but the clothes and body are so well preserved. There was one that stuck with me. It was a little girl folded into a brown leather suitcase. Her body seemed fresh and well preserved, but she had been missing for 10 years, and the clothes she was wearing were not the same ones she disappeared in. They seemed dirty and ripped, and I remember the police matching these exact clothes to a store that sold them years earlier. I remember the details because it was a ripped pink tutu and it was stuffed inside the suitcase. For some reason, that caught my attention more than anything else. Oh, and the Prime Minister Australia had, Harold Holt, went swimming and never returned. Now when something goes missing or we're not going back to something, we say, off for a Harold Holt. Personally, I need to know what happened to my uncle. I never met him. He disappeared without a trace one day years before I was born. A lot of dispute within the family about him, as in half the family say he had his own place, the other half say he was still living at home. Some of the family believed he killed himself over a girl he broke up with, others say he moved countries and is still alive. BC he was secretly gay. Would be late 60s now, and a few say he was abducted. My mother contacted a spirit medium over something else, and this lady claimed that she could see him, and he had a head injury, and he was in a body of water. She described him to my mother and said he was saying his body was made sure it was never found. When the medium asked who did it, he replied with brother, given that he was from a large family with like 7 brothers and most of them dead too. I doubt we'd ever find out who did it or where his body is. My mother also met a lady who can see spirits, and this lady told my mother there was a man and accurately described him hanging around her and he was signaling something. They couldn't work out what it was and he's never come through anything else. I'm pissed. BC I can communicate with spirit, but I've never seen him ever though I've called. I can communicate with his mum though, who passed when I was 7. And yes, obviously a big believer in the afterlife, spirits, all of that. Without a doubt your solar essence or whatever sus lives on after your body is gone. I don't know how I know, it's just something I've always known. This one might turn some heads, but 9/11s. I'm not a truther, but it's such a complex situation that I do wonder just how so many failures happened, how Al-Qaeda managed to evade NORAD, and just exactly what happened to Flight 93 in Shanksville. It's one of those situations where I'd just really like to know the exact timeline of events. If it turns out it's just like the commission report, so much the better, but for an event like that, man, it'd be good to have it completely settled. I have to know the truth about aliens. I just have to. When I was little, like 7 or 8, I started reading those Penguin Classics books. When I was on vacation one time, my grandfather noticed I had a kid's version of 20,000 Loges Under the Sea and asked me, "Are you really interested in that stuff?" I was a kid, so I was like, "Yeah." Every day after we went to the beach, we'd walk to the beach house our family had talking about science and mysteries. I was probably the closest to my grandfather than anyone else in the family at that point, so those are all great memories. He was probably in the high 70s at the time when we were at the beach. When he was younger, he was stationed at a military base in Texas and then Virginia before and during the Vietnam War. He told me much later in his life that he was a high-ranking official in a program designed to give soldiers drugs to make them more effective. When we were at the beach, one day we started talking about aliens. It was all sort of joke why and whatever since I was 7, at least at first. When we got back to the beach house, we stood outside on the porch and he told me, "I can still hear that. I have to tell you something very important. Your mother and her sisters wouldn't care. You're not allowed to tell anyone until long after I'm dead, got it?" I had no idea to respond and thought it was about money or something. Instead, he told me, "When I was in Virginia in 1957, 2 men came into my office and asked, 'Are you?' I bad his grandfather's name. He said he told them they didn't have the clearance to know, and then they showed him clearance cards he had never seen before. He said they took him to a film room and said he needed to see a video of an incident for nation security reasons. According to him, they showed him a video of a runway being built at an Air Force base in California. He said he started getting annoyed and told the guys he didn't have time to watch a construction montage. A few seconds later in the video, the flying saucer appears out of nowhere, lands, and 3 little gray men got out and walked around. They got back in, and the thing shot up into the air, getting clocked at 20,000 miles an hour and went into space. I can still hear him saying, 'Little gray men,' and remember trying to figure out if he was lying or not. True or not, that story started my obsession with UFOs. I asked him years later, only months before he died, if he was telling the truth about the alien video. He swore he saw it and said that many high-ranking officials in the 50s and 60s talked about UFOs and aliens. He said the bodies found at Roswell are being kept at Walter Reed Hospital and he tried to get access to them to be able to examine them for years. I've never seen him be so serious about something, he said. It's a crime the people don't know, it's a crime I don't know. That's the biggest story in the history of the planet and they're keeping it locked away. I'll never know the truth. Shit. A few years after he died, I started getting back into UFO stuff, watching JRE after stepping away from going too deep when I was in middle school. In the episode with Jacques Vallée and the director of The Phenomenon, which is so worth watching if you're into this stuff. The director mentions the story of a video of a landing incident almost word for word how my grandfather told it. I watched that clip over and over again and was completely shocked. I told my mom and she said after he got back from Virginia he was very into sci-fi and space and nobody could figure out why. There's so much bullshit out there, but so much deeply compelling evidence also. Something is definitely up and I don't think any one person knows the whole truth, which is why the public doesn't know. Too many otherwise regular people completely swear they saw something like my grandfather did for them to all be crazy. What were the pyramids for? Did they really have the ability to conduct electricity through the air? There's so many ancient ruins made with precision that we've barely been able to match today, and I want to know how. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please drop a like, and to stay up to date with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the button under this video.